So, you picture Japan, right? Safe, orderly, famously polite.
Yeah, that's the image.
But kind of peel back the layers and, well, you find a legal landscape with some surprisingly unique rules and actually right now some incredibly complex, really deeply contested shifts happening, particularly in family law.
And that's exactly what we dug into for this deep dive, pulling insights from a whole stack of sources. We've got everything from visitor-focused pieces by Salvador and Paolo from Tokiao on YouTube,
Right.
academic analysis like legal protection of non-traditional families in Japan, discussions from Meiji.net and Discuss Japan, legal perspectives from very best law offices, comparative research from FBSI, and even like real-world chatter from a Reddit thread.
Okay, so our mission here, to cut through all that information and pull out the most important nuggets for you. We really want to help you understand not just what some of these unique laws and big legal changes are, but to really grasp why they matter, because they often reveal these deeper currents within Japanese society.
Okay, so let's maybe start by looking at some of those specific, maybe even kind of quirky laws that caught our eye and the sources, things a visitor might actually run into, or just find fascinating because they're so different.
Yeah.
Then we can move into the really significant and frankly, pretty complex legal changes impacting families.
That sounds like a really good path through this material. So, setting aside the broad strokes for just a moment, let's get granular. What are some of those specific, maybe unexpected rules that might pop up?
Well, one that stands out immediately from the sources, like Salvador mentioned, involves foreign flags. Article 92 of the 1907 Penal Code actually makes it a criminal offense to damage a foreign flag in Japan.
Wow, that seems like pretty intense prison time.
Potentially, yeah. Up to 2 years or maybe a 200,000 yen fine. But what's really interesting, and the sources point this out clearly, is that prosecution only happens if the foreign state actually asks for it. And crucially, the law doesn't apply to Japan's own flag.
Okay, that distinction makes sense then, kind of preserving freedom of expression regarding their own symbols while having this sort of reciprocal courtesy rule for others. Fascinating. What else did you find that feels a bit unusual?
Something tied to the workplace, actually, but maybe worth knowing if you're doing business there.
Yeah.
Pressing colleagues to drink at those after-work gatherings, the nomikai.
Yeah.
The 2019 Act on Comprehensive Promotion of Labor Policies banned what they call power harassment. And sources clarify this ban extends to social coercion, like, forcing drinks on people.
So the law is actually wading into social drinking customs. Really?
It seems so, yeah. Framing that kind of pressure as a form of workplace harassment, violators could face fines up to 200,000 yen. It kind of reflects a broader effort to address workplace dynamics, even in those informal settings.
Okay. What about bringing medications into the country? I've heard you have to be pretty careful.
Absolutely. This is really critical information from sources like the UK government guidance that was referenced. Many common cold and flu remedies, even some painkillers with ingredients like codeine, are just plain illegal.
Illegal! Even like over-the-counter stuff you might just grab at home.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
The advice is very strong. Check with the Japanese embassy or consulate before you travel. Seriously, bringing prohibited items can lead to detention or even deportation. It's a really stark difference from many other countries.
Wow. Definitely something to be aware of. Any other surprising rules related to just being out and about?
Yeah, there's one that speaks to public courtesy found in the 1960 Road Traffic Act, Article 71. It actually requires drivers to avoid splashing pedestrians with mud or dirty water.
Wait, so you can get a fine for splashing someone with a puddle?
A petty fine, yeah, up to 20,000 yen. It's a small detail, maybe, but it legally reinforces that expectation of public consideration.
Right. And speaking of small interactions, the sources mention something about what happens if, say, a cashier gives you too much change.
Don't keep it. Sources recount this case from 2015 where a woman was actually arrested on swindling charges for taking an extra 45,000 yen given to her by mistake.
Oh, wow.
So while it might seem like, a lucky accident, legally, it's considered theft.
That's a powerful reminder about honesty being the legal standard, not just, a moral one. What about littering? Japan has this image of being absolutely spotless, but the sources note a real lack of public bins.
It's correct. There's a law against littering, but yeah, many bins were removed for security reasons after the 1995 subway attack. So the cultural norm, which is reinforced in some areas by potential fines up to 30,000 yen.
Okay.
In specific, like beautification enforcement areas is you just carry your rubbish home with you until you can dispose of it properly.
So you're personally responsible for your waste until you get back to your hotel or apartment or whatever. Okay, noted. What about making your own drinks at home? Is that allowed?
Not if it results in alcohol over 1% ABV.
Yeah.
Homebrewing beer, for instance, totally illegal. Even mixing certain things like, say, sangria can be prohibited.
Really? Sangria?
Yeah. Sources note that some fruit infusions, like umishu, are permitted, but they specifically require using alcohol over 20% ABV to prevent ongoing fermentation, you see.
Ah, okay. And the penalty for making your own hooch?
It's surprisingly severe, up to a 1 million yen fine or even 10 years imprisonment.
Whoa.
Yeah, they take their alcohol tax and regulation pretty seriously.
That's a significant deterrent, for sure. What about electronics? Could bringing something simple, like a baby monitor, cause issues?
Potentially, yeah. The radio law requires certain radio equipment, like walkie-talkies, cordless phones, and yes, baby monitors, to meet specific technical standards and carry a special mark, the technical conformity mark.
Okay.
Using devices without it can lead to a fine up to 1 million yen or imprisonment up to a year.
Wow, that's a penalty that could really catch someone off guard just for bringing their usual monitor from home. Jeez. And finally on this list, smoking rules. They've tightened globally, obviously.
Oh, they definitely have in Japan. It's illegal to smoke outside designated areas and illegal to walk while smoking. You often see people kind of huddled in specific spots or carrying those portable ashtrays.
Right.
Fines can be up to 5,000 yen. And while indoor smoking is largely banned since 2020, sources do clarify it's still permitted in places like hotel rooms, dedicated cigar bars, and some smaller restaurants and bars that were actually established before April 2020.
So not a complete nationwide ban everywhere indoors yet, but definitely much stricter than it used to be. Paolo from Tokyo's YouTube source also added some interesting context for visitors, didn't it? Like things that might feel like tourist traps.
Yes, exactly. That source offered some really practical tips, suggesting that while Tsukiji Market is famous, it can be really crowded and potentially overpriced for seafood compared to maybe other options.
Yeah.
They also pointed out that English menus might sometimes have higher prices than the Japanese ones,
Ah, interesting.
recommending using Google Lens to translate the Japanese menu instead.
That's a super practical tip. And SIM cards.
Buying them at the airport is generally more expensive than getting one at major electronic stores like Big Camera once you're actually in the city.
Right.
And the source also highlighted some things that are legal in Japan, but might, raise eyebrows in many other places.
Like what kind of things?
Well, things related to diet and hunting, specifically hunting whale and dolphin, is legal there, as is eating seal, sea lion, and shark fin.
Shark fin, okay.
Yeah, while maybe not mainstream staples for most people, these practices and foods are legally permitted and available. And confirming what we touched on earlier, buying cigarettes from vending machines is legal, but you need that special TASPO ID.
Interesting contrasts, for sure. So when we look at this whole collection of laws, from not splashing pedestrians to strict homebrewing rules and those medication bans, what does this tell us, especially for someone just trying to understand Japan a bit better?
Well, I think it reveals that the orderliness and safety Japan is known for aren't just like cultural norms. They're often explicitly codified in law, sometimes in ways that feel very different from our own legal systems.
Right.
Understanding these specific points helps you navigate daily life more smoothly, and it kind of highlights the underlying values the legal system is designed to uphold, whether that's public courtesy, honesty, or really strict regulation of certain goods. It shows how law reflects culture on a very tangible, everyday level.
Yeah, that point about law reflecting culture on a tangible level is really key, isn't it? It makes these seem less like random rules and more like, insights into societal priorities.
Exactly.
Now, if those are the surprising everyday layers, let's dig into something far more complex, the really fundamental changes happening right now in family law.
Yes, this is a major, major shift. We're talking about the revision to Japan's civil code regarding child custody after divorce. This was passed in May 2024 and is set to become effective by 2026.
Okay.
And this move away from the sole custody system that's been the norm since, 1947, that's a really big deal.
So for nearly 80 years, it was almost exclusively sole custody. Just one parent got primary rights, basically.
That's right, yeah. And under the new law, joint custody will be introduced as an option for divorced parents.
How is this new system actually going to work in practice then, according to the sources?
Well, parents can reach an agreement on either sole or joint custody themselves. That's the ideal, I suppose. However, if they can't agree, the family court will step in to make the decision. And sources like Discuss Japan emphasize that the legal standard for the court's decision is the interests of the child.
Okay, interests of the child seems like a standard phrase, but sources also described it as kind of vague, right?
Exactly. That vagueness is a really significant point of concern raised by critics, as it leaves a lot of discretion to the family court. And here's where it gets particularly contentious. Joint custody can actually be ordered by the court, even if one parent refuses it.
Wow.
That's what's being called non-consensual joint custody.
Ordering joint custody over a parent's objection, that sounds like a major source of the controversy we saw discussed in like the Reddit thread and other sources.
It absolutely is. And another really important aspect is that the law can apply retroactively.
Right.
Meaning parents who divorced under the old sole custody system can petition the court for joint custody under these new rules.
Okay, before we dive further into the controversy, can we just clarify some terms? Very Best Law Offices, among others, talks about parental authority versus custodial rights. Are those the same thing, or?
No, they're related but distinct. Parental authority is the broader concept. It includes the rights and responsibilities for the child's overall care and education, making major decisions about upbringing, schooling, that kind of thing. Custodial rights are more specific, referring to the right to actually live with and physically care for the child day to day.
And they usually go together.
Yes, typically the parent the child lives with holds both. But sources note they can be separated, though it's apparently quite rare. For example, a child welfare institution might have custodial rights while a parent retains some parental authority.
I see.
And importantly, if a step-parent wants to adopt the child, they need the consent of the biological parent who retains parental authority, even if that parent doesn't have the day-to-day custodial rights.
Right. That distinction definitely helps clarify the legal framework they're working within. So what were the main reasons cited in the sources for making such a huge change to the system after so long?
Well, sources like Meiji.net and Discuss Japan point to social issues as key drivers. Things like unpaid child support and the denial of visitation to the non-custodial parent were significant problems under the sole custody system. So the intention behind the change is to allow both parents to remain actively involved in their child's life and share responsibility for child rearing after divorce. Meiji.net also highlights that the law includes provisions aimed at strengthening the child support enforcement system itself, which is a related issue.
So the stated goal is positive. Increased parental involvement, better child support. But the rollout and specifics seem to be generating significant opposition. What are the main criticisms and concerns people are raising?
There are several, yeah. Critics highlighted concerns about the process itself, the feeling in some discussions that the child's perspective and best interests weren't perhaps adequately centered, and that the bill passed relatively quickly despite opposition. Discuss Japan suggested this might have been partly due to political pressures and also the difficulty for victims, particularly of domestic violence, to speak out publicly against the bill.
Right, that makes sense.
An online petition opposing the bill was noted, but reportedly didn't halt its progress.
And that non-consensual aspect seems really central to those concerns.
Absolutely. This is perhaps the most significant point of contention, especially in discussions like that Reddit thread. Concerns include forcing single parents into continued contact with former spouses they may wish to avoid.
Yeah.
And, more critically, the potential risk this poses to victims of domestic violence or abuse by potentially allowing abusers court-ordered access. Now, the law is supposed to ensure sole custody in cases of DV or abuse.
But the worry is how it plays out.
Exactly. Critics worry about how consistently and effectively this will be interpreted and applied in practice, especially given the vagueness of that interest of the child standard we mentioned.
That vagueness seems like a recurring theme, leaving these crucial decisions in really sensitive situations up to court discretion.
Yes, that lack of clear, strict guidelines for the courts, particularly in high conflict or abuse cases, is a major worry raised by opponents.
What about other potential downsides if joint custody becomes more common? Are there practical issues?
Yeah. Sources mention potential practical burdens. Under joint custody, parents typically have to consult on significant decisions like if a child needs to relocate, their choice of career path later on, passport applications, major medical treatments.
Okay.
If they disagree, their options are pretty limited. Go back to court, which costs time and money. Or one parent essentially just gives in to the other's view. Critics worry this could lead to constant conflict or significant delays in necessary decisions. There are also concerns, sometimes termed atrophy of parenting, where the parent the child primarily lives with might become less autonomous in day-to-day decisions, constantly having to seek approval or risk conflict.
It really sounds like the success of joint custody depends so heavily on parental cooperation, which, let's be honest, is often absent in a divorce situation.
Exactly.
How does the comparative research shed light on this? You mentioned MPSI.
Yeah, the study from APSI is relevant here. It suggests that, generally speaking, shared custody can lead to better outcomes for children, psychological, academic, social. But this is often seen in contexts where it's well supported by the legal system and the culture. It really highlights the importance of consistent parental involvement.
So it's not inherently bad, but the conditions really matter.
Precisely. APSI and the Reddit thread both acknowledge that shared custody may not be ideal and can even be harmful in high-conflict situations. The research suggests that persistent parental conflict is actually more detrimental to a child's well-being than being raised by a single parent.
Wow.
So simply making joint custody an option doesn't guarantee positive results. Its success seems to rely heavily on the parent's ability to cooperate, a supportive legal framework, and broader cultural acceptance of this co-parenting model.
The amended law also introduced something about allowing contact for third parties, didn't it? Like grandparents.
Yes, that's another related change. Family courts can now permit contact for relatives, other than parents like grandparents, if it's deemed particularly necessary in the interests of the child.
Okay.
And crucially, if that relative previously had custody of the child at some point.
That seemed like a direct response to situations where grandparents might get cut off after a divorce.
It does seem to address that specific issue, but sources like Meiji.net also voice concerns here too. They suggest this provision could potentially burden the child, or that it might sometimes be driven more by disputes and rivalry between the families rather than by the child's genuine wish for contact with those relatives.
Right. It could get complicated. Now, moving beyond divorce, that academic source, Legal Protection of Non-Traditional Families in Japan, really pulls back the curtain on how Japan's existing kind of traditional legal structure interacts with more diverse family forms.
Yeah, that source argues pretty strongly that Japan's civil code, which fundamentally hasn't changed much since 1947, and whose provisions are often interpreted by courts through the lens of a very traditional nuclear family unit.
You mean male father, female mother, biological children?
Exactly that model. It argues that this leaves families that don't fit this mold quite vulnerable and lacking adequate legal protection.
What are some specific examples of how this plays out for these non-traditional families?
Well, for same-sex families, for instance, despite the existence of municipal partnership certificates in many areas now.
Yay, those are spreading.
Yeah, but there's still no national legal recognition equivalent to marriage or civil unions. And this creates legal hurdles in various areas, although sources do note that courts have started granting some limited protections, like recognizing de facto spousal status in certain contexts. The lack of comprehensive national anti-discrimination laws is also pointed out as a concern by sources, including reports from the UN Human Rights Committee.
Okay. And what about transgender individuals and their families?
They face significant legal barriers, particularly concerning parental rights and recognition. The source highlights how courts have historically interpreted laws pretty restrictively. For example, sometimes denying legal paternity based on a parent's current legal sex, even if they are genetically related to the child. The Gender Identity Disorder Act, the GID Act, previously required surgery for a legal sex change, partly based on societal assumptions about how family structure and parental gender might impact children. Although, importantly, the Supreme Court overturned that surgical requirement in 2023.
Oh, right.
Acknowledging changing social circumstances and international standards. So that's a big shift.
Step-parents and step-families are also mentioned, aren't they? How did they fit in?
Yes. Step-families are often implicitly expected to conform to that traditional model. While step-parent adoption is possible, sources note that courts have tended to restrict contact between the child and the non-custodial biological parent after this step-parent adoption occurs.
Even if there were previous arrangements.
Yeah, sometimes overriding prior court-approved contact arrangements, seemingly prioritizing the legal integrity of the new step-family unit over maintaining the child's relationship with their other biological parent.
Interesting. And families formed through assisted reproductive technology like surrogacy?
The source details how Japanese courts have consistently refused to recognize a legal parent-child relationship between an intended mother and a child born via surrogacy, even if it happened abroad, even if the intended mother is genetically linked to the child.
Wow.
This upholds a really strong legal principle, which was solidified in a 2020 law, that the woman who gives birth is the legal mother. period.
So across these different types of families, same-sex, transgender parents, step families, RT families, the traditional legal framework really seems to struggle to accommodate modern realities.
That appears to be the core argument of the source.
Yeah.
The legal system's foundation, built on that traditional family model, creates these gaps and challenges for families that don't fit neatly into that mold.
Yeah.
However, the source also points to an evolving trend. While traditional interpretations are still dominant, there's a notable shift where courts are increasingly referencing current social circumstances. This influence seems to come from domestic social movements, international pressure, and referencing decisions from bodies like the European Court of Human Rights.
Suggesting maybe some potential for the courts to interpret laws more flexibly in the future.
Yes, it hints at the possibility of greater recognition and protection for non-traditional families down the line, although significant legal gaps definitely remain. That Supreme Court decision on the GID Act surgery requirement is cited as a prime example of the courts looking to both social change and international standards when reevaluating existing legal requirements.
So why should you, listening to this, care about these really deep dives into Japanese family law? It seems quite specific.
Well, because these discussions reveal these profound societal debates playing out right in the legal arena. They show a country really grappling with the tension between its deeply rooted traditions and the undeniable reality of evolving family structures and diverse identities in the 21st century. It highlights that struggle between upholding historical legal foundations, recognizing individual rights, and collectively defining what truly constitutes the best interests of the child in a world that keeps changing.
It's a powerful reminder that legal systems aren't just static rulebooks, are they? They are dynamic reflections of a society navigating its own present and future, often wrestling with these really complex trade-offs.
Exactly. It's fascinating.
So we've covered quite a range today, haven't we? From those quirky, sometimes surprising laws that offer glimpses into Japanese daily life and cultural priorities.
The splashing of the flags.
Right. To the really profound and complex legal shifts happening in family law and the ongoing challenges the system faces in recognizing diverse family structures.
And our goal, really, was to provide a shortcut, pulling the most important insights from this stack of sources to give you a clearer picture of these fascinating legal facets of Japan.
And hopefully we've done that, offering not just facts, but some context and connections too.
So maybe a final thought. As Japan navigates this tension between its traditional legal foundations and the complexities of modern families, what can we maybe learn about how any society attempts to balance the weight of tradition with evolving social realities and individual rights?
Or, considering the vastly different global approaches to family law, particularly around divorce and non-traditional families, who is truly best equipped to define the best interests of the child, and importantly, based on what criteria?
Yeah, questions that really reveal just how interconnected law, culture, and individual lives truly are everywhere.
Definitely something to ponder. These topics are incredibly rich and absolutely worth exploring further on your own if they sparked your interest.